JT Wister of Locked On Utes. The conversation about Utah going to the ACC is likely moot. There's almost no way, but now we've seen it surface that the ACC could try to extend to 20 teams with the idea that Clemson and Florida State are going to leave. And in that, two of our old buddies, Washington State and Oregon State, who many speculated would be in the Big 12. And I still think will bring some sort of brand power into whatever conference they eventually are added to, at least from a viewership standpoint. Washington State, spectacular. The fan base at Oregon State, the passion you get there, and even recent football success is good enough to have a couple of selling points. From your perspective, as someone who's shared a conference with them for 10 seasons, are those two teams a couple of entities that can keep a very much dying ACC alive?
Oh, I mean, I think it doesn't hurt if you're going to lose. I mean, you can't replace the brands that they are in danger of losing, Clemson and Florida State. And
we're going to go ahead and full stop on the conversation. Utah is not going to the ACC. There's no way to bring that partner in with the other two, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you there. That's where, and you sent me a map earlier today, Drake, detailing what a potential super conference could look like for the ACC. And I do feel bad for Oregon State and Washington State still that they were left out, because based on the brand they were putting on the field, that did not deserve to be the case. Ask DJU, who's getting the bag at Florida State now. What is Miami doing? They gave the bag to Cam Ward because those guys had a lot of success at Oregon State and Washington State. Washington State started the season incredibly hot. I mean, they fell off the cliff, but they were still in the top 20. How about Oregon State? They were still incredibly tough this past season. They beat Utah. They nearly beat Washington at home. They've been one of the toughest places to play at home for years. The style and the success they've had on the field merits them being in a Power 4 conference. I wish it was still Power 5, but obviously that's the whole thing we're doing around with this like that.
Of course, you would wish it's still Power 5. You would.
I know. I have no problem saying I am a traditionalist and that I loved having 5 Power 5 conferences. But I think with the way that everything is shook out, Utah's very lucky to be in the Big 12. I think there's a lot of exciting things coming up in the Big 12, especially as we're less than 100 days now, Drake. I'm already licking my chops to some of these matchups and the new rivalries that are going to be formed for the first time. But I do feel bad that Oregon State and Washington State, they don't really get to form new.
If you're a true traditionalist, then Utah's a great Mountain West school. But that's,
hey, there you go. That's
you call yourself a traditionalist. Okay.
Well played. I will say, though, going back to Oregon State and Washington State, I don't think they can save the ACC brand. I think it's about as good of a Band-Aid as you're going to get, though, if you lose Clemson. It's a crappy Band-Aid. It's barely going to stick on there, and it's not great. But they at least give you some competitive teams that have had a lot of recent success.
And this was, I think, Bill Connolly from ESPN had put out on a radio show that he thinks the Big 12 will go to 34 or 36 teams and be the first one to really expand into a super conference from a team or size standpoint. And I don't know if I see that. If they do, they certainly bring in Washington State and Oregon State. They go to the ACC and pick up different additions from that conference. But JT, from the perspective of somebody at Utah who just got to the Big 12, the question for me becomes, would you want to see a Washington State, Oregon State? Would you want to see a USF or a Tulane or a San Diego State? Or does this we just need to hold the ship here for a second? At what point do we get any consistency? And is consistency what fan bases want?
I would say this. I would love if I was just talking about the respect I have for the brands and how bad I feel for those fan bases being left out. I don't think what they have put out on the field the last few seasons merits them being put out. I would love to find a place for Oregon State and Washington State in the Big 12 because I think they're deserving of it. But that's where I would stop at. It just, you mentioned some of those numbers, Drake. You should have, you might have been able to see my eyes, those of you listening, they got huge. That's just too much to me at that point. Could you imagine having 36 schools and it's and our conference championship game where we have 2 teams out of 36. That just seems crazy. That's where we're making all these drastic changes to the sport that in some ways it will always be college football, but in some ways becomes less of the sport we first fell in love with. We're seeing that with all the shakeups and the newness here. So to me, that just seems I just don't feel the need to add some of the San Diego States and some of those other schools too. I don't want those schools to be left behind, but I don't want to be I don't feel the need to be in a conference of 30 teams right now. If we have to go to super conferences, which I feel like we're heading for, then that's one thing, obviously. But I don't, especially if it's a super conference, I would want it to include the super brands also, not just some of those other ones too. And I like those schools. I'm not trying to disrespect them. I'm just saying I don't know if they're having a Big 12 with 30 members and all of those not being bigger brands and a lot of the schools already in the Big 12. I don't see that as a good thing. More is not always better.
Yeah, JT, I truly do believe a year from now, Florida State and Clemson will have left the ACC, North Carolina right behind them. And at that point, when true chaos breaks out, Miami, Pitt, Louisville, there are plenty of schools, NC State, who are looking for new spots to go. You call yourself a college football traditionalist, which I think it's an admirable thing, but if the death of the ACC and the expansion of 4 new teams in the Big 12 in that conference keeps us alive, Utah included, is that something that you fall on the sword for?
Yes, because like you said, then it becomes a survival thing. I mean, that's what it becomes at that point, is you're just trying to keep yourself in the best position to continue to move forward in the college football landscape. I mean, once again, being left behind is the most terrifying thought, right? You have a great season and you're not a part of the super conference or whatever it is. So then you won't get a chance to play for a conference championship, like especially being with Utah, like having just won those 2 conference championships. Like that's what we root for these teams for. And yes, obviously a successful season isn't just defined by, did you win a conference championship? A lot of brands, you have great individual games and performances and the memories you can make at those games. That's what we're college football fans, right? But the opportunity to compete and against the biggest and best is what we all love. I know it didn't go great for TCU, but TCU was a really fun story that they got to the national championship game, that they beat a brand like Michigan. Yes, and they got ran over by Georgia, but they made a fun run there, and that was really fun and exciting. And now you can look at TCU, and every fan base probably does it, where it could be like, if we just get the right mix of talent, games break our way, that can be us. And the thought of that not being available to Utah or a lot of these schools is something that really terrifies me.
JT, coming up, Cam Rising is the best quarterback in the Big 12. Let's talk about it. This is the Locked On Utes, Locked On Big 12 crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. eBay Motors keeps your ride or die alive every time. I have a Nissan Maxima sitting outside from 2016. 2016 is getting further and further away, by the way, and passion, drive, and patience from eBay Motors keeps my ride or die alive because I like to bump into things. I have a plastic piece that's dragging on the floor every time I drive. It just, people can hear it, so I cut it off with scissors. Is that the safest thing to do? I don't know. I got stuff all over my hands. And then I said, eBay Motors, what was this plastic piece, and can you give me another one? And they said, absolutely, with a guaranteed fit. It fit the first time. 122 million parts for your number one ride or die with that guaranteed fit. eBay Motors makes sure you're burning rubber, not cash. Make your car the MVP at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. eBay Motors. They will keep your ride or die alive. They will make sure that your 2016 Nissan Maxima, the plastic piece that fell off, is still driving and not making noise. Nobody stares at you on the street. That is ebaymotors.com. Millions of parts for your MVP. Win every time with parts that fit your ride. JT Wistersill of Locked On Utes. Athlon Sports says that Cam Rising is the number 4 quarterback in the Big 12.